Chris Frantz has enjoyed a not quite once-in-a-lifetime run of success, starting in the 70s and 80s, first as the drummer for Talking Heads, and then again with Tom Tom Club, which remain beloved and influential bands today. Both bands featured bass pioneer Tina Weymouth, who is also Frantz's better half, and the two have been making great music together for several decades. Frantz has just written a great new autobiography, Remain in Love, Talking Heads, Tom Tom Club, and Tina, and I had a chance to speak with the Talking Head about the book, his life, and his music. I wanted to first of all congratulate you on the book. I read it. I enjoyed it very much. And,
thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I have to tell you that, we've had this pandemic, and so a lot of us have been cooped up in our homes. Our lives have been in a little bit of a holding pattern for quite some time, and I just want to thank you for the music and for the book. They've both been a great diversion during this time, and they've helped get me through a difficult time here, which I really appreciate.
You're very welcome. I'm happy to hear that. It has been difficult, hasn't it? I mean, geez.
Well, and you're a musician too, so I'm wondering what do you do with your time when you're not able to perform in front of people? Has it been kind of driving you crazy?
Well, I've been doing a lot of interviews because of this book the past couple of weeks. So I've been busy enough. Let's just say busy enough. But what bothers me is that one aspect of being a musician that I always enjoyed was the travel. You know, I love to travel, and I mustn't complain because I'm in a very nice spot here in Connecticut, and we have a lovely home on a pond, and our houses are far apart, so I can walk around and without bumping into other people. It's very lovely here, but to tell you the truth, I don't miss TSA, but I miss getting on an airplane and going, to Europe or Jamaica or even Minnesota.
Right. Well, hopefully at some point we'll all be able to travel again freely, and you'll be able to perform live again, and we'll be able to see you. Let's talk about the book a little bit. It's called Remain in Love, Talking Heads, Tom Tom Club, and Tina. The title of the book is a tweak of Talking Heads' Remain in Light album. What's the significance of the title?
Well, when I was early days writing the book, I thought I should really get a title together, in my mind, and I should really set the tone. So I thought, what is the tone going to be? And I thought it can't be one of these grumpy, sort of whiny, complaining rock and roll memoirs, where people try to get even with other people and stuff like that. But I can't do that because that's not me. And what can I write about? What can I write about that's unique? And I thought, well, one thing that's unique, I mean, of course, Talking Heads is a very unique type of band, and so was Tom Tom Club. But even more importantly to me has been my relationship with Tina, which is, remains very strong to this day. My love for Tina remains very strong. So I thought, love, love, love. And then I thought, remain in love. Which is what she and I have done, and I remain in love with my bands as well. I mean, there's so much to be in, for me anyway, so much to be in love about. So that's how that title came about. And when I thought of it, I thought, oh wow, I'm really glad I thought of that.
Well, I want to talk to you a little bit more specifically about your relationship with Tina and your relationship as bandmates in just a minute here. But I am curious, what prompted you to write the book at this particular time? I mean, was there something you felt compelled that you needed to get off your chest?
Well, there are things that I felt were important to be said that hadn't been said before, but I didn't want it in any way to be vindictive or mean-spirited. I wanted, you know, I waited a long time because I thought I don't want to in any way burn my bridges, you know, with anyone in particular. I don't want to burn my bridges. And so I waited and I waited. And then finally I said, you know, a lot of people around me are sort of like losing their memories and dying and stuff like that. I better get this done. And, you know, we're of a certain age now. I don't know about you, but I'm 69. And some may say that's the perfect age.
Do you say that? Do you say that?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty good so far. But well, to answer your question, I just thought it was a good idea to wait up to a point, and then I just couldn't wait any longer. Had to get it done.
When you talk about addressing certain things and not burning bridges with someone in particular, are you specifically talking about David Byrne, or is it more than that?
It's mostly David that I didn't want to burn bridges with, but it's probably other people too. And but I must tell you that this book is not a book about David Byrne. David's just one of many interesting characters that are, you know, depicted in this book. It's not in any way a Chris Frantz versus David Byrne story.
Right, and it doesn't come across as that at all, and it is populated with so many interesting characters. Obviously, Talking Heads sort of got their start in the New York punk scene at CBGB's, and you played with Television and the Ramones and Blondie. That is a very storied and mythic time in music history, but you experienced it firsthand. You talk about this in the book a little bit, but in the mythologizing of that particular time and place, what do you think people get right and what do they get wrong about that time, since you were there and saw it firsthand?
Well, I think people get it right when they think that it was a very exciting and artistically fecund time. It's true that all the bands down at CBGB's were pretty unique and different from each other, and some of them were, you know, when I think of Patti Smith and Television and Blondie and the Ramones and other bands that were down that way too, Mink DeVille. I think that they're, you know, kind of the utmost importance culturally. They're not just some half-assed players. They really are. These bands were really deep and, to me, very moving artistically. And so when people think of that as an exciting era, I think they're right. I'm not exactly sure what people get wrong about the era. What do you think?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, to me, you think of all those bands that you just mentioned, and they went on to varying degrees of success or influence for a lot of people, which was extremely significant. But then on the other hand, you tend to think that maybe people romanticize that particular time and place of what was happening specifically at CBGB's, which you detail greatly in the book. And you just wonder if it's, you know, are people not necessarily painting an accurate picture of what was going on there, or was it, it almost seems too good to be true with the talent that was there at one particular time, but it sounds as though it actually was true.
Yes, it was true. And it was a very romantic time. I mean, how much more romantic can you get than like living in a cold water loft with no heat after 5 p.m. and bathroom in the hall, and trying to write songs and trying to maintain a relationship with your girlfriend at the same time and talk her into being in the band. I mean, I'm not alone in this respect. It was very romantic for everybody involved. I mean, 1 block away from us is where Debbie Harry lived with Chris Stein, and their loft was even worse than ours. And a couple blocks up the street was Dee Dee and Tommy, Joey. Dee Dee and Joey Ramone lived with at least for a time, with Arturo Vega, who was their graphic designer who designed their logo and everything. And I mean, there were just great artists all around. Even though it was a beat up and basically a slum of a neighborhood,
right?
The artists were there, although you would never know it just walking down the street because everything was going on behind closed doors.
An earlier part of the book that I really appreciated right around this time is when you talk about auditioning for opening for the Ramones, and I think it was Johnny Ramone says something along the lines of, they suck so they can open for us. It's something like that. Yeah. You ended up touring Europe for the first time, opening for the Ramones, and obviously different musical sensibilities. How did the bands get along on the road?
Well, with the notable exception of Johnny Ramone, who was always in a bad mood, everything was great. We loved those guys. We loved their band, and I don't know if they loved us, but they certainly tolerated us. And I think Dee Dee was the one that at least Tina and I were closest to. And he was fun to talk to, Dee Dee would say things like, "Yeah, I gave up drugs yesterday. Boy, it was a real shocker." Things like that. And he was, Dee Dee was the main songwriter in the band. I don't know if everybody knows that. But even after he quit the band, he continued to write songs for the Ramones. I mean, I was there in the office. We had the same manager, and I was there in the office when, along with Dee Dee, when our manager got a call that they needed a theme song for Pet Sematary and the movie.
Right.
Stephen King was a big fan of the Ramones, and would the Ramones write a song for the movie? And Dee Dee said, "What's the movie about?" And they said, "Well, it's about a pet cemetery." And Dee Dee said, "Oh, okay." And the next day he came back with the song, "I Don't Want to Be Buried in a Pet Cemetery." So they used to stop. It was so much fun. When I first saw them at CBGB's, and they were still in their formative stages, they used to stop in the middle of their show and yell at each other. And Dee Dee would say, like, "No, Johnny, I don't want to play. I don't want to go down to the basement. I want to play. I don't want to walk around with you." And they would argue about like what song they wanted to play. And I don't think they realized how entertaining those little arguments were.
Yeah, well, they certainly they appeared like characters, and it sounds like they actually were characters.
Yes, they were.
You mentioned your wife, Tina, who also played bass in Talking Heads, and you play within Tom Tom Club. You're very complimentary toward her throughout the book. And she had to, she really had to experience a lot of instances of sexism, it sounds like, throughout the career as a woman being in a band in that particular scene. Doesn't sound like it was a very easy time for her.
Yeah.
You managed to ride the ups and downs of being in bands together for decades, and you're the rhythm section, which is hugely significant to Talking Heads because the rhythm of the music is such a key part of what makes it so enjoyable. And I'm curious, how did you make it work being in a band and in a relationship together? That can't be easy.
Well, there were moments when the pressures of being in a band were it can be very tiresome, exhausting even, particularly touring around the world, and you never get enough sleep, and I'm sure you know what that's like. But people always say to me, Chris, how do you do it? What's your secret? And I think that it was always something that I wanted to do. I never wanted to get out of, my relationship with Tina and her being in the band. I always thought it was my idea to bring her into the band. And I knew that she shared an aesthetic with in the early days with David and I. And I also knew that she had a really good sense of rhythm, and her musical tastes she did not have a repertoire of standard rock and roll cliched licks in her musical vocabulary.
Right.
Her musical vocabulary was more, in fact, classical. And so when she created bass parts, which she started doing right away. I mean, she hadn't played the bass guitar before, but she picked it up really quickly. And she started creating parts that were, very different from what, say, the bass player in the New York Dolls was playing, or Dee Dee Ramone was playing. They were more melodic and just musically very different. So I always felt it was a great pleasure to have Tina in the band, and the fact that she was my wife and I got to go home with her at night was even better.
I'm assuming she's read the book, and I'm curious if she remembered anything wildly differently than how you portrayed it in the book, or if she had a different perspective on some things that surprised you.
There were some. Thank goodness Tina liked the book. I mean, God, can you imagine if she said, "Chris, this is terrible. You can't put this out."
That would be tough. Yeah.
But she did. Tina did worked on the final edit with me, and she did make a few little corrections. Nothing too substantial, but details, and details are important.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about David Byrne. You give him credit for his many creative strengths throughout the book, but then there are also examples of what seems to be kind of insensitive behavior on his part. And you talk a little bit about how he could sometimes be difficult to connect with on a personal level. I'm curious, how does that reconcile with being a bandmate where you sort of need to function as a group, and connecting is such a significant part of making the music work? How do you kind of reconcile those two things?
Well, how I reconcile it is this: the band was more important to me. I think I can convey this idea in the book. From a young age, I had this idea of being in a band, and that the band would succeed, and that we would have both artistic and commercial success. I mean, this is my dream, and so Talking Heads realized that dream, made it real, and in many cases, I was willing to put up with stuff because for the good of the band. I honestly felt like it's more important to keep the band together than to argue about this thing right now. Sometimes we did have discussions, and we did have to say, this is not fair. But it was like a recurring thing, and it became like a snowball, where the more success we had, the better things were going for the band, the more distant David became with the rest of us, and that's just unfortunate. But the fact is, we were still doing really good work together. I mean, when you listen to Remain in Light or Speaking in Tongues, or even the final album, Naked, when you listen to those records, these are not half-assed records. They're very artistically deep and, to my way of thinking, important. So some things you have to just put up with, Like no presidential administration is perfect. No, neither is any band.
You go into detail in the book about the enormously popular concert film Stop Making Sense, which again, since we've been in this pandemic, I've watched it a couple times because it's such a, for me, it's just such a joyous occasion. The band seems to be having so much fun, and again, there's so much rhythm involved in it, and syncopation with the band members. I just wanted to get a few thoughts from you on that particular experience, since it's something that so many people associate with Talking Heads. That and of course the iconic big white suit.
It was a great time. I mean, the thing about Stop Making Sense is that everybody, from the band to the crew to the people actually making the film, the filmmakers, the cameramen, the sound men that recorded it. I mean, everybody just did a fantastic job, and it was like magic. The way it all came together, and I mean, there was a lot of hard work involved. Don't get me wrong, but everything just coalesced to my way of thinking, this almost perfect movie. And I mean, it's darn close to being perfect. And again, thank goodness for that, because what if it had been terrible?
Good point. You've been so generous with your time here. I just have one or two more things before we wrap up, if that's okay.
Sure.
The name of the program here is Minnesota Matters, so I feel like I need to ask you if you have any particular memories of Minnesota over the years. I know in the book you mentioned the record store or Folk Jokopus, and I'm curious if you have any other particular recollections of this particular area.
Well, there was Jay's Longhorn, which was a really interesting place. It was like I guess it was the you could call it the CBGBs of Minneapolis. We loved playing there, and it was like did you ever go there? It was a restaurant. They pushed the tables back at the end of the night and set up a band. And
I didn't. That's just ever so slightly before my time.
But another interesting thing happened that once we were playing, the concert was in St. Paul. This is the tour that became Stop Making Sense, the movie. And we were in St. Paul, and somebody said, Bob Dylan's in the audience. Bob Dylan's here. So we were like, wow, Bob Dylan's here. And afterwards, this young girl, very attractive, came backstage and identified herself as a friend of Bob Dylan. And she said, Bob would like to invite you back to his house after the show. And we said, great, we'd love to come. We got the address. And of course, this was the days before GPS.
Right.
So we're driving around suburban Minneapolis looking for this address, and finally we found it, and we knocked on the door, and the same girl answered the door, and she said, "Oh, hi." And we were like, well, here we are. There was like 6 or 8 of us, members of the band. We're here to see Bob. And she said, "Oh, I'm sorry. Bob's gone to bed." So that was that.
Oh, how disappointing.
Yeah, it was pretty disappointing. And but you know, that's how it goes sometimes.
Did you ever cross paths with him at any point down the road after that?
Yes, I crossed paths with him. We were invited to do when Roy Orbison passed away. Shortly thereafter, his wife Barbara, his widow, Barbara wanted to have a concert in Los Angeles to raise money for a homeless shelter. Shelter for homeless people, which would have Roy Orbison's name on it. So we said, great, we'd love to do that. But, of course, David didn't want to do it. So we did it. Tina and Jerry and I did it as the Shrunken Heads.
Right.
And a lot of bands performed, but the headlining band, I mean, really a lot of bands performed, but it was at the Universal Amphitheater in Burbank. And the headliner was Bob Dylan with the reunited Byrds, all the original Byrds. And so we were not allowed on stage. Nobody was allowed on stage, but we were in the green room, the dressing room, watching the performance on a television monitor. And it was really cool. You know, they did Mr. Tambourine Man and a couple other Bob Dylan songs that the Byrds had recorded. And then Bob Dylan, I was sitting there with Tina, Iggy Pop, Emmylou Harris, Bonnie Raitt.
Jeez, what a crew.
Wendy and Lisa from Prince's band, a couple of the Bangles. You know, we were all sitting there watching this, and all of a sudden Bob Dylan's security men came into the room, and they said, "You all got to leave. Bob's coming in, and he doesn't want to see anybody." So I was amazed. Everybody got up and left, except for me. I said, "I'm not leaving. I flew out here from New York. I want to see Bob." So
he stood you up once already, right?
Yeah. So I just sat there, and Bob Dylan came walking into the room. He looked around, and he said to me, "Hey, man, where'd everybody go?" And I said, "Oh, your security men were just here, and they kicked out everybody." And he said, "They kicked out Emmylou?" I said, "Yeah, I'm afraid they kicked out Emmylou too." And he said, "Oh, that's not good." That was the time I actually met him face to face.
Well, that and many, many more great stories are in the book, Remain in Love. One last question for you. Obviously, it's a huge undertaking to sort of look back on your life the way that you did, and I'm wondering what did you come away from the process thinking or experiencing? What were you most surprised by?
Well, when I was looking at all the itineraries and you know, the amount of shows we did and the amount of, you know, records we made and everything, I think to myself, gosh, how did we do it? But the fact is that 9 days out of 10, we were really having a good time, and we just barreled through that career. And we accomplished a great deal in just really little over 10 years. So long story short, I'm very grateful for the experience.
Well, Chris, again, I can't thank you enough for you being so generous with your time. I highly recommend the book, and looking forward to getting this on the air for our listeners. And thanks so much for taking the time to share your stories with me. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome, Scott. I appreciate it too.